Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm sitting with Sarah Adler. I will let her introduce herself, but thank you so much for sitting with us. And I'm very excited to see how this interview unfolds. I'm sure you have some wonderful information for us, and I'm looking forward to it. And before I let you introduce yourself, basically the goal of this interview is to explain how starting a business and business immigrations work, with a specific focus on students and international students within Canada. So, with that, Sarah, please take it away.
Great. So my name is Sarah Adler. I am an business immigration lawyer. I've been doing Canadian immigration for over 15 years now. I've recently been quite involved in business immigration and helping businesses relocate to Canada. And it's an interesting pathway for students. Because there are lots of options, but it's not the regular streamlined process that most students go through. So it's good to be informed and informed ahead of time on what you need to do.
Okay. And before we get into some of the nitty-gritties about what that process looks like in specific, could you maybe tell us a little bit about where you studied, how long you've been practicing for, and anything else about yourself that our viewers may find interesting?
Okay. So like I said, I've been in practice for over 15 years now. I actually went to law school in the U.S. I'm a Canadian citizen, but I went to law school in the U.S. and I did 2 years at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, at their law school in Minneapolis. And then I did my last year here at home at Osgoode Hall, but I officially graduated from a U.S. school. Had to go through the full accreditation process in Canada, and then was called to the Ontario Bar in 2007. I was previously called to the New York Bar in 2005. And my first job in immigration was actually as a clerk, because I was still going through the NCA process. So I clerked for another lawyer in immigration for a year, and then I articled with them, and I've been doing corporate immigration ever since, dealing with businesses, large scale, small scale entrepreneurs, but really focused on the business aspects of immigration.
Awesome. So if you don't mind my asking, why did you decide to come back to Canada? Or why did you decide to, and I suppose in other words, why didn't you stay in New York?
Because I met my husband about a week before I registered to go to school in the U.S. We had our first date on the same day I put in my full deposit to go away to school. So we did long distance for 2 years, and then I decided I was going to come home.
Okay.
That was why I transitioned back to Canada.
Cool. That's a very adorable story. I'm glad it worked out that way. Hopefully it's treating
Me
you
too.
well. And how would you say business immigration is treating you? Are you having fun with it? Does it ever get too challenging, exhausting?
It's there are different levels to it. My first boss used to always say that immigration is 10% law, 90% customer service.
Right.
So going through law school to do a customer service job, just it seems a bit indirect, but it's really what you make of it. You can make it really straightforward and just be about the law. Or if you're a people person, who cares about the people and what they're experiencing then, and helping them through a process that is life-changing and often difficult, whether it's somebody moving for work, coming into a completely unknown environment, or if it's a refugee who's has a complete shift in their life when they move. It's really about helping people, and if you engage with the people, it's super interesting. If you're take it from a perspective of just being technical, the corporate piece can get very routine, and it can be difficult to engage. And then as you kind of move past that, and this is one thing I didn't quite understand when I started, once you move past that routine and you start seeing those cases that are different, or you start working with entrepreneurs, and it's more about strategy. you're not spending so much time thinking about the details, but it's about strategizing how you can do something and making what somebody's goals in life are fit the process. So sometimes there's multiple pathways to do something, but depending on what the applicant's end goals are, some programs are better than others.
Fascinating. Would you say then, after 15 years of work, that it's exactly what you wanted to do? Is the thrill and the passion still alive?
I think the passion for people is still there. And again, it's looking at helping them through a process and guiding them through a process. And it's always feels like such an accomplishment when you have somebody who's arrived, who's settled, who's thriving. And then you kind of help them through the last pieces of settling. Some lawyers don't handle like the settlement pieces, like getting your SIN card and dealing with the initial setup of health insurance, but I do. So I actually get to speak to some of my clients afterwards. That's one of the big differences between dealing with a corporate entity moving on immigration and dealing with entrepreneurs, is those corporate entities usually have a lot of relocation support. So they've got HRs who'll walk employees through those initial things that they need to do to kind of to set themselves up. How do I get set up a bank account? How do I get my SIN number? How do I get how do I do those basic things? When you're dealing with entrepreneurs who are coming to set things up, they don't have those resources locally. They may have sent an HR person, or they may be engaging an HR company once they're here. But even that, I find that they do rely a lot on my services to kind of point them in the right direction. So networking is really important. Making sure I know people who do offer those services and offer my clients that support. And then that works backwards as well, because they often have clients who'll come to them and then they have immigration needs and they give me a call. So it's, networking is an important part of creating we'll call it an ecosystem for helping entrepreneurs who are moving to Canada to thrive.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Very insightful indeed.
Good.
I'll move on to the second part of this interview, which is about starting a business. And with that, my first question is, what are some things students in general, so not international, not domestic, just in general, need to keep in mind before starting a business? And are there any specifics for starting a business in Ontario?
Well, I think there are two different ways to look at this. I'm going to take a step further back. If you're coming to Canada to study, if your goal is to be an entrepreneur, and that's what you want to do, ahead of time you want to run your business, you might want to have an understanding of the application processes to do that, because different provinces have different programs. So, for example, the provinces in the East Coast have great programs to help students transition using their postgraduate work permit from student to entrepreneur to permanent residence, and it's quite streamlined. So New Brunswick has that, Nova Scotia does, as well as Newfoundland. And if that's one of the requirements of those programs, are that you've studied in that province, though. They want people who are going to stay and support the local economy. So if that's your goal, I would recommend looking at schools in those on the East Coast, because they do, from an immigration perspective, really want to support entrepreneurship in foreign students. Ontario and as you go west, that's less so. And so if you know from the outset that's what you want to do, I would start by looking at those schools. That's not to say that it's not possible in other ways. So when you're setting up your business, the nice thing when you're a student is you get that postgraduate work permit. And on that postgraduate work permit, you can potentially start your own business because you can work for any employer in any location.
Right.
But you have to have a mind towards what your business is doing, and again, what your goals are. So I think planning ahead, I think it's going to be a running theme through this conversation. Planning ahead is important, and having an idea of where you're going to go is important. Because when you're looking at permanent residence, a lot of the permanent residence programs are premised on the fact that you are employed and that your employment can be verified. So generally for individuals on study permits, the general pathway is to get your work experience and then go get your PR. And then, that takes a couple of years, but it gets you through the process and allows you to stay permanently. But under the Canadian Experience class, you have to be employed by another entity. Okay. So if you're working for yourself, that program is not going to work for you. So you need to look at other options. And depending on the type of business that you're running, there can be different options. So there is the startup visa program. So if you're working on developing a tech product or service, that's a program you might want to look at. It requires that you have a prototype developed, which some people do coming out of school. Then you get accepted into an incubator program or get connected to an angel investor. Then they issue a letter to support your business. And then with that letter, you can apply for your PR. It's probably the fastest program in these circumstances to get to the end goal of permanent residence. But it is very specific about your product, about what you're doing. And again, it hinges on getting accepted into an incubator program or getting accepted by an angel investor, a listed angel investor. The benefit to that program is you don't necessarily have to have a capital contribution, but it does look at how shares are divided. If you have multiple people in your business, more than one person can apply to the program, but there is a limit of 10 because you have to have a minimum 10% ownership in the business that you're developing. So there is a share requirement. If you are lucky enough to have independent financial means for setting up your business, you can also look at the provincial nominee programs for entrepreneurs. And as we were in Ontario, we're going to focus on Ontario for a moment. That program requires that if you're in Toronto, you have a minimum investment of $600,000 and that you have a minimum net worth of $800,000. If you're outside of the GTA, it's $200,000 and $400,000 respectively, or if you're in a tech business, it's also $200,000 or $400,000. That program makes location very important. So that's another piece you want to think about. Is it important for you to be right downtown in the hub of downtown Toronto, or can you set up your business in Niagara Falls or Cornwall, or do you want to be? Ottawa is a tech hub that gets pushed into the lower financial threshold. So location becomes really important. Where is it important for your business to be to thrive for your business? The other thing that you need to look at is you need to look at your business plan. They do require that you have a pretty thorough and thought through business plan. And there is a guide online, which I can send you a link to. I would look through that and read through it and understand the types of things that they're looking for. They are looking for a thought out plan. They're looking to make sure you have an idea about pricing, profit margins, marketing, hiring, and they're going to require that you hire at least one person to work for you over the course of the application. They're longer term applications. They start out with work permits and then a 2-year requirement of ramping the business up, and then a review, and then you get a certificate, and then you have to use that certificate to apply for permanent residence. So it's quite a lengthy process, and there is a requirement for how much time you actually spend in Canada. So if you're anticipating that you will be traveling a lot, which is often the case for a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't often stay in one location for very long. Right. That can be a complicating factor.
Okay. Sorry, continue.
There are two other programs I'd like to just really quickly go through. Okay. If you're looking at a cultural or an athletic-based business, there's a federal program specifically for that. It doesn't get used very often, but it is available. Again, it doesn't necessarily have the financial thresholds. And then there's also an option through Service Canada about getting what's called a labor market opinion to support the application, to support a work permit and then permanent residence process. But that they had a pretty robust program for entrepreneurs. It closed last spring. They've been talking about bringing something else in, but they haven't yet. So that program's a bit in flux. So I just wanted to mark it's out there. There's significant changes happening, and there may be something more available under that program in the next year or two.
Okay. So based on everything you've just said, 2 questions come up. Okay. The first one being, why is it that the government doesn't want, and maybe I'm not phrasing this correctly, but why can't we as students, while we're doing our undergraduate program, why aren't we able to open up our own businesses and have that count towards our PR?
I think it comes from it's a good question. I don't necessarily have a clear answer on that.
Right.
But I think it comes down to documentation. How do you prove that a business is actually running and that person is running the business? It's and then an evaluation of, is it a viable business? So we have to recognize that the entrepreneurial mindset is completely different than the government mindset. And so the government's really looking at, I want to be able to tick a box and answer questions. And it's very structured and very regimented. And you end up with people evaluating applications who don't necessarily have a business background. So they don't necessarily understand the nuances of these. They're building a program based on government priorities. So this is something else I should flag. The type of business that you're looking to develop can also be important. Are you starting up a franchise? Are you purchasing a franchise and starting up a franchise? Or are you setting up an independent coffee shop? Or are you, is your degree in aerospace and you want to start an aerospace design company? I mean, right. Those are very all those situations are treated very differently and in regards to the business plans and what the government objectives are and the industries that they want to build up. So a lot of the programming is policy based. The other thing that you'll find with Ontario is, Ontario and British Columbia as well, as you when you talk to people who haven't been to Canada, are not familiar with Canada, and you say, well, where do you want to start your business? You hear Toronto and you hear Vancouver, because those are the only places people really know who don't actually live here. Right. And those are the places where people go. So because the majority of immigration and the majority of business comes to Ontario doesn't think it needs to work very hard to attract people. To start up businesses. And so they don't necessarily build the most facilitative programs here. You can where in contrast in the East Coast, as I've mentioned, they've really looked at students and entrepreneurship and building up entrepreneurship in those locations. And so they tend to be a bit more facilitative. So to go back to talking about strategy a little bit, one thing you might consider, individuals might consider who want to be entrepreneurs, but you are looking at the application process, they might want to invest a year working for someone else to meet those employment requirements under the CEC program, and then apply under that program to get their PR, and then start their own, officially launch their own business afterwards, or reestablish their own business afterwards. It can be informative to work for somebody else and get a good sense of what you would do, what you wouldn't do. It can give you some experience, help you create some contacts. Some people find it useful. Some people find it incredibly frustrating to do that. But that might be one of the considerations that you put in the mix as well.
Okay. So still, there's a lot of questions that come up as you're just talking to me right now. But number one, why wouldn't student businesses be held to the same standard? Like, why can't we be extended that same scrutiny that someone that's already graduated would, in terms of business viability, in terms of finances, and all of that stuff?
I think it's not that you're dealt with differently. I think it's the opposite. I think people out of school are treated exactly the same as any other entrepreneur. But it creates, when you get points for business experience, when you get points or consideration for how much time you've worked in the industry, and they usually only consider postgraduate experience as professional experience. That may or may not be fair, but they do. Also, financing, generally people who have been out of school longer have better access to financing. Not all the time. I know lots of exceptions, but generally that's the case. And so when you're treated exactly like everybody else, it can be a little bit harder when you're a more recent graduate.
Okay. And I know you touched on this a little bit, but business plans, right? They change daily.
Yes.
Daily is probably an overestimation, but
I don't think so.
Frequently. They change pretty frequently. So how would you recommend we kind of work around that? Like, is it that we show you one thing now and then we constantly send updates, or how does that work? So
I've actually had people say to me, a business plan is outdated the moment you finish writing it.
Right.
And what you do is you start off with your best estimation. You start off that business plan by developing it with the information that you have in the way you think things will go at the time you're writing it. And then that's what you work with. If by the time you're submitting an application, there's no significant change, I wouldn't necessarily change it. And I'd put the planning. I mean, generally you plan like 1 year, 3 to 5 years, and 10 year, right? So if you're focusing on maybe the 3 to 5 year mark, that gives you some wiggle room. Your plan might change, but your goals are still the same, and the general direction is the same. And that's kind of what they're looking at. And then there's an understanding that these things change over time. So for example, when you're doing an OIMP application for an entrepreneur, you submit a business plan initially, and then you get 2 years to build the business. And when they're evaluating the business at the end, when they initially accept the application, they go through a process plan. It's essentially a list of goals and accomplishments that the government wants to see that you've achieved by the end of the 2 year period. And then when you do your final report, you're going to cross-reference those goals. And you're going to say whether you achieve them or you haven't achieved them, and perhaps why. So there's certain things that are concrete you have to do. There's certain things that are flexible. But once you're in the program, the government has a specific interest in supporting you through the program. And so province does have a lot of resources for entrepreneurs to help them network, to help them get the resources they need, to help get guidance through the process. And so it's fairly, once you get accepted into the program, the province is fairly facilitative through it. But it's not like you're stuck to the plan you originally submitted. They're kind of specific milestone points that you have a conference with an officer with, and you agree that these are reasonable and achievable goals, and then you work through those processes, and you have a contact who, if there's a major shift, you can contact. So I mean, if your hiring projections are off but you meet your minimum requirements, or your income projections are off because COVID hit or whatever, those will be taken into consideration. If you decide to completely change your business purpose, that might be a problem. So it depends partially to the degree that your business plan changes and what factors are being that instigated those changes. I mean, some stuff just isn't in your control.
Okay, awesome. And then my last two questions, and the second one's a bit of a two-parter, and then I'll let you go because I'm sure you're.
So it's really three questions.
It's three questions, but potato, tomato, tomato. So my question is why, and this is going back to something you said about work experience after you graduate. Why are there maximum working hours on student visas? And then the second one would be, why can't we get that full-time work experience while we're in university itself? So why do none of those kind of count towards the PR application?
Okay, so the limitation on the off-campus portion of your study permit,
portion like of your 20 study hours, permit, 20 hours, believe, right? Yeah.
It's kind of twofold. One, the government wants you to focus on your studies so that you can graduate through your studies. The other is a policy decision because they don't want people applying for study permits for the purpose of work and not really have an intention to study. They want to make sure those who are coming have an intention to study and an intention to graduate, and they're not circumventing the system just to be able to work.
Of course. Okay.
Yeah. So that's really a policy decision. For postgraduate work, I think at some point there just needs to be a line on considerations, because usually, with the exception of a few programs, the work experience really needs to be full-time. They want to see somebody with a full-time position. That the part-time work, which is under 30 hours a week, is often not taken into consideration. So if you're studying, you're in theory not working full-time. So that's why they draw the line at that particular point.
Okay. And hypothetically then, if we were to apply, say that full-time work during your undergraduate could have let you start a business sooner within Ontario specifically, would that be a viable solution?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. So if the full-time work, for example, we were able to do it during our undergraduate degree, would that be a viable solution for entrepreneurs looking to start right after they're done with their undergraduate?
No, because it won't consider as qualifying. Most of the programs require that it's 1 year of full-time work in order to qualify for work experience. So that's both under the federal skilled program. You need to have a minimum of 1 year full-time work. And under the CEC program, you have to have a minimum cumulative 1 year of work in the previous 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and see, one of the challenges here is there's so many different factors to keep in consideration of. So It's also possible that once you have that 1 year qualifying work experience, as opposed to doing a CEC program, you could look at federal skilled worker, which is a completely different set of considerations. So if you're really committed to, and that work doesn't necessarily need to be for an employer, so that might be another way to go. It becomes problematic because then in the express entry program, there's a lot of points that are attributed to work and Canadian work experience. That needs to be for an employer. So there are a lot of different levels when you're thinking about these things that need to be addressed and considered. And the earlier you do that, the earlier you think through it, the better you can plan. One of the recommendations I make for a lot of students, whether they're entrepreneurs or not, is if possible, get involved in like a co-op program in your program, if at all possible. It creates a lot of connections. It helps network and helps lead towards those jobs you need to qualify as quickly as you can. There's also, one thing that we didn't consider as well, there's also other ways sometimes to plan these things. If you have a business partner who's a Canadian citizen, there are ways to organize the share structure and the paperwork so that you're considered an employee of the business as opposed to an owner. And then once you've got your permanent residence, you can shift ownership structure and renegotiate those pieces as well. So, if there's a group of you, there are other ways you can potentially do it based on how you're structuring the business.
Okay, so that's definitely a lot of information. So for students looking to start their own business, who would you recommend they go to? Can they reach out to you? How soon do you think they should start planning?
As soon as they know that that's what they want to do and that
Right.
that's reasonably what they're going to pursue. If you're thinking about it and kind of, it's more important to build the business idea first. And once you realize, okay, I've got a viable business, I really don't want to work for anybody else. I really want to pursue this. And you feel compelled that that's what you want to do. I would, at that point, reach out for a consultation and see what factors you need to bring into place, and how you might need to look at things slightly differently or structure things slightly differently. So if you're getting to a point where you're thinking, okay, I'm gonna incorporate a business, or I'm gonna put together a partnership agreement, that's kind of the point that I'd start saying, okay, start thinking about the immigration factors and how you're going to structure this, because that may inform how you at least initially set things up. As for people to speak to, this is an area that gets a bit nebulous, and there's not a lot of people. My experience is a lot of people advertise that they do this work, but very few are really experienced in doing it. I think the best thing to do would be maybe send you a list that can maybe be posted of people who really do work in this area. I unfortunately am not taking clients at this point, but I can get a list of people who do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. I'm sure that'll be very helpful. And with that, we've come to the end of my questioning. Did you have any closing remarks?
Just that I think the economy in Canada is going to be shifting a lot in this post-COVID environment. I think that the government is going to have to see entrepreneurship through foreign students as an important aspect to rebuilding and supporting and growing the Canadian economy. And it's my opinion, and this is solely my opinion, that they're going to need to provide more robust programming and options in this area. So fingers crossed, we'll see some forward thinking, and we'll see more opportunities and availability over the next couple of years in this area, because I think it's going to be an increasingly important area when it comes to Canadian economic planning.
Awesome. Definitely. I personally am looking forward to that change or that update in the industry. But thank you so much for sitting down with me today. It was absolutely wonderful talking to you. And I hope you have a great rest of the day.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.